So now we are purely into topic 2. And topic 2 is Git and Bash and all that stuff. And we talked about Bash already, so I'm not going to really go through a whole bunch of that. But I did want to talk about Git. So let me pull up this guy. And we have a few notebooks. I'm going to close these so I don't have to get confused of what I'm touching. And we might use this later, so I'm going to pull it up. Okay, so Git and GitHub and stuff like that. We're going to focus about that. And we'll talk, because we can talk about Git like literally all day, if not all week, if not the whole year. So I'm going to make sure we stop at, you can see on my, I don't know if you can see my screen, but we'll stop at the hour. So in about 20 minutes, we'll kind of stop and take a breather, but I'll get through this stuff first. Okay. And then we'll go into office hours for anyone who wants to go into deeper stuff or check their environment. Okay. So what is Git exactly? So one thing you should learn the name of is something called version control. I will tell you is data scientists are notorious, have a bad name for themselves amongst the software development community of being really bad at version control. And there's a few reasons why, but partly it's just because data science comes from so many different fields where it's not just computer science and software developers who become data scientists. So version control might not be the first thing you learn about. So it's kind of important to kind of like know that this is not something is necessarily always expected, but it's going to be greatly appreciated by your team by knowing how to do version control. Okay. So what is version control? Basically, it's just saying, hey, when you make changes, like how do we track those changes? So there's a little meme right here. It basically says, Git being like, it's kind of like at this stage and in the past, like I would say almost 10, if not 15 years, maybe even longer than that now, Git has kind of been like, oh, like when we talk about version control, you're basically talking about Git at this point. Subversion, has anyone like, I don't know if some people have past experience. Does anyone know what subversion is? Mercurial? No, that's good. You don't have to worry about it. You're probably going to use Git anyway. And then if you look at this little tiny font right here, I probably should get a bit of a picture, is you have final 2, final. This is the real final. Oh no, this is definitely the final. You might have done something like this in the past, so like, make like different Microsoft Word, documents, stuff like this. Or, you can see like my, you can name your notebook different names. You want to avoid doing this because essentially you're not really tracking these changes. You're basically saying, oh, this is just the next version. And there's so much better ways to do this. So what version code really allows you to do is basically taking a new file, like saving a new file for every change you've made can be frustrating or and time consuming, or it can just be too much. It can be that like every change you make, oh gosh, like, make a new file. Like imagine making 100 different changes. Like that might mean 100 different files, and that takes up a lot of space. That's kind of a pain. And then imagine if you want to compare 2 files to see what the changes were. It's kind of hard to see that. Git actually takes care of this. Note that I just mentioned subversion. No one really talks about it, but basically the difference is one solution is that one thing with Git version or version control is that if you're working with a team, like what if you make a change and then someone also wants to make a change, right? Like how do you handle that on the same file? Well, one way to do this is something basically where you lock out everyone else and you make that change and then you unlock it and then other people can come in, make a change and then lock the door. So only one person can make a change at a time, which can work in practice, but can get kind of cumbersome because now you have to wait for someone to like make a change. And what if you want to undo that change and all that stuff? So that's where Git really has become like the dominant, tool for version control. Okay, so why you should learn Git? It's basically because it is super common. You're going to find code, you're going to write code. A lot of your coworkers are going to use Git by itself. However, just know that Git can sometimes, I kind of showed this exact comment, I think yesterday, is Git can be kind of seen a little bit of like, this is a really great tool, but I don't know how it works, just like do these commands. You'd be surprised you can get pretty far in life with only basically knowing a few commands and not really understanding what's happening. And to be honest, at this stage in development, I would say that's perfectly fine. I wouldn't say like you need to be a Git master or anything like that. As we get further in the course, it might be worth revisiting a topic and really understanding how Git works. But don't feel like you have to know everything on top of everything. And I'm going to show you what the main stuff you should know. Okay, cool. And of course, if you get yourself in trouble and stuff like that, you have, someone like me who can help you out, who can hopefully pull you out of a bind and not worry about that. So the main thing you should know about the Git workflow is that we have something called the working directory, the staging area, and then your actual repository. So we should hopefully know what repository means. Basically, repository is like the place where all your code lives. It's basically the single folder where everything resides, okay? And what we do is we actually make changes. So like, let's say you have like your repository, your code base, you make some changes, right? And you want to say, hey, I made some changes and I want that final version after I made those changes, but I want to know like later on, like, what did I change exactly? That's where Git comes in. And this working directory basically says, hey, this is what like your current, how do I say this? This is like your current work. That's what you're changing right now. Like, you know, you're coding away, you're saving the file, right? And you're making some changes, playing around with stuff, deleting stuff, putting in things. That's your working directory. That's the stuff that you're changing right now in the present. Then you say, wow, like that was like, I actually think I made some good improvements here. I want to save these changes. I want to commit to these changes. I'm going to use that word in a second, but I'm going to commit those changes. That's when we say we move something into the staging area. Basically say, hey, I did a whole bunch of work and I want to save these changes as like a committed thing that I have changed, like some kind of point in history. And we move that into the staging area. We're going to use something called Git Add. That's the command to add those files that we've changed into the staging area. And then we look at that staging area. It's like, yeah, I think that looks good. I think this is a good point in time where I can say I've made these good changes. I think they're useful. That's when you do Git Commit. And that Git Commit moves those files, basically saying, I was like, oh, I made these changes, and says, hey, this is now part of your history. You can think of it like the timeline of your repository. And so that's what ends up happening. You create something called like your Git commit history, and you can actually see the different changes that you've done over time. Okay, does that make sense to people? Like intuitively doing this stuff? Okay, so you hear me say working directory, staging area, and then your Git commit history, which is basically your repository. So to actually moving stuff, like usually you have your repository, you've made some changes, and you want to add those changes to the overall timeline. You would do some Git add, and it would be Git add is in your terminal. You Git add, and then you type the list, you type in the file or all the files that you've changed. And so Git add, let's say index.ipnb, which means you made changes to the index.ipnb file, all right? And that would say, hey, that moves it to the staging area. Then you say, all right, you might do some more changes and then do another Git add, or maybe you do some other stuff and do Git add, Git add, Git add, and then you're, okay, cool. I think this is a good point in time to save as a history point. That's when you commit to that history and you do Git commit. And that Git commit moves from the staging area to kind of like your overall timeline of your repository. And note that is this Git commit, you already have stuff in the working directory, so you don't have to say what you're committing. It's to say, oh, whatever is in your working directory, we're committing all of that. This -m, and you can see message, this message is what you can type. You can type whatever you want in message, okay? And basically the idea here is that you can annotate your points in history of saying, what did you change? Like, what was the major thing that happened in this commit, this point in history? And this is where it's really useful to make good commit messages of saying, explaining, at least very briefly, saying, hey, what was the whole point of making this a highlighted point of the change? Okay, makes sense? Okay, and then there's a third part that's not really in this diagram. It's called Git Push. And Git Push basically pushes your changes to a remote repository. So if I'm going to try something real quick, because I tried this earlier today in office hours, and for some reason it didn't work. I'm going to draw on the screen. Can you see that green arrow? Okay, good. For some reason, office hours, it didn't work. So you can imagine when I do a Git push, so I'll just put push here. When you do Git push, what that does, it puts things in this fluffy cloud, which is basically going to be GitHub. It could technically be like another server, like at work or something like that, but you can imagine, at least for now, this is like GitHub. And the idea here is that you have your code on your own computer. We call this your local computer, right? Like all of this stuff is your local. So your laptop, your desktop, or whatever. And we do a Git push, it pushes that code, your changes and everything, your history, onto the cloud, which in this case would be GitHub, or it could potentially be, some other computer. Okay. And that's basically, this is like most of your flow on GitHub. Or sorry, not GitHub, on Git. Okay. Sound good? Okay. Any clarifying questions of anything I've gone over here?
Is there any purpose to the staging area besides just being an initial step to move it to the repository?
Mm, no, not really. It's basically like a failsafe. So because if you just went straight to commit, you might say, like, for the most part, we're going to be working with one file, but sometimes you might change multiple files. If you just did git commit on one file and say, oh, wait, I also need to change this, it would be nice to have like kind of like a buffer. And that's really what the staging area is, just that buffer between the two. It's just an extra formality. If I'm going to say I'm sure someone else who's an expert in Git would be able to say, well, there's a reason why, like maybe it prepares something when you do the staging area. But essentially for you all, you can think of it as like essentially the buffer. So you don't just commit directly. Okay, cool. All right, so I mentioned about Git Add, Git Commit, Git Push. Those are like the three, like, the holy trinity of your, Git flow, okay? There's a few other things that will help you like you use Git as a tool other than just being like making history. Git Status, that basically tells you what is the current status of your stuff, like what's in the working directory, what's in the staging area, and what's ready to be committed. So this kind of gives you a little update of like where things are in your local computer. Git diff is useful when like now you've actually made this history and actually checking what are the difference between these points in history, these different commits, we call them. And that's really useful to say, like, what if, for example, you make a change and it breaks something? Like, well, how did it break? You can actually look literally line by line to see what difference you have between those changes that you made. Okay, cool. And then last one, Git log, basically shows you all the changes, all the history of what you've done. All right, cool. So don't feel like you have to memorize all of these things, but I would say if you like write down git add, git commit, git push, git status, git diff, git log, those 6 commands, I think you would be pretty set for most of the things that you will be doing overall in your day-to-day. Okay, and of course, there's a bunch of extra stuff which we'll talk about. If not today, maybe sometime in the future as well. Okay, so let's hear it. Let's see. Let me clear this annotation. You guys still see the green, right? Yeah, okay, good. Not good, but I know that you guys see it. All right. So, all right. So that's kind of the intro right here. Now I'm going to talk about GitHub, which is kind of at this point, like basically, if you talk about Git, you're going to talk about GitHub. And GitHub, you should think of it as just basically, it uses the Git tool to make collaboration work a little bit easier online. So some things you should know about GitHub is that you can do things like hopefully you guys seen like Git Clone, right? I think that's in like the first topic. Git Clone, and you basically say Git Clone is a specific Git tool, and we would have a URL, but in this case we're using GitHub. Know that there's other repositories out there like Bitbucket. There's a lot less now. GitLab is one. This can also be technically another computer on the network. So if you're at work, you might actually do a Git clone from another person's computer onto your own computer. But the idea here is there's some URL that points to say, hey, there's a repository that exists somewhere, clone that to here, okay? All right. From your local, what you would do is like, okay, if you're starting up a new repo, it's like, okay, like if you are starting a new project and you're like, all right, I'm gonna make a new project, I have no like history that I have to worry about, I'm starting completely fresh, you would basically make a directory. And then when you're in that directory, so you like cd into that directory, you would do git init. And that git init basically initializes the repository and basically says git say, hey, this right here is a repository. One thing you should know is that you should be like, I will say at this level, avoid putting a Git repo within another Git repo. So if you're already in a Git repo and then you make a new directory and then do Git init, you'll get some weird funkiness that you probably wouldn't be expecting. So be aware of that. And the other thing is don't do Git init on higher level folders. So for example, yesterday someone had accidentally, actually under my advice, which was wrong, actually didn't initialize their whole user directory as a Git repo, which doesn't really do any damage by itself. But now it's if you have that as a repo, like the whole thing, everything is a repo within a repo. So that's what you want to avoid too. So you kind of want to think of like trying to keep these separated, okay? So the idea here, you make your directory, you cd into your directory, you do git init, and we're just starting from fresh. You might add some files, like you might do some changes, then you do git add, and you would add the file names. Note that if you do add dot, remember, represents like your current directory. That basically adds everything that's in the current directory. Any changes you made, add that to the staging area. Okay, that's what this is a shortcut to. I personally do not suggest doing git add dot, even though I know the curriculum talks about it. I would actually specify what specific files you're changing, just to make sure that you know what files you're changing, because this can get people in some weird funkiness sometimes if they're not careful. And then doing git commit, and then with the -m, saying, all right, ready for the message, and then writing your message out and saying what exactly this commit was. Okay, and then once you're done with that, say, okay, you might do some even multiple commits over time. Say, okay, I want to sync up with GitHub, so that way the stuff that's on my computer and the stuff that's online matches up. And that's when I would do git remote add origin, and then the URL of that repo. So I'll show this probably during office hours when we end. But basically this allows you to say, all right, here's my new repository, and I'm going to say, here's the connection, and that connection, we call it remote. Okay, so your remote, repository. We're adding a connection called origin, and that's going to connect from your local computer to the remote URL, that remote repo, and that's going to be the URL for that repo. Okay, so you would do git remote add origin, and then whatever the URL is, and then you would do a git push -u. I'll explain this as -u in a second. Origin, and then I put master on here, but nowadays we usually probably use main or whatever your branch name is. And so what this is says, hey, push whatever's on my local computer, push it up to this this URL. So this usually would be GitHub. This URL, push it up there, okay, using the connection origin. That's what this origin is saying. It's like, okay, push my code up to this part using origin, and push specifically this branch name. So whatever your branch name is here, that would be what you'd put here. If your branch name is main, you'd put main here. If your branch name is some other funky name, you'd put your funky name here, okay? And then this -u, we only have to do this once when we first set up the repository. This is something called setting up the upstream. The upstream basically allows you to create a path between those two. And so there's some extra baggage that comes with it. But after you push this once, you wouldn't have to use the -u anymore. But basically that's the initial part. Okay, make sense? Thumbs up, sound good, sideways, like, okay. All right, cool. No one's going completely thumbs down. That's good. All right, I saw it sideways, but that's okay because I haven't shown you anything. I just told you what's going to happen. So I wouldn't expect you guys to necessarily know everything. All right. So basically, like I said, this is how you would push things from your local. If you have changes that are on your remote compute, like on the GitHub cloud, maybe there's another, let's say, for example, I have another laptop and I made changes on that laptop and pushed them up to GitHub, and now I'm on my second laptop, and that laptop does not have the changes, I would pull down those changes with git pull. So I'd git pull and would pull down those changes from whatever changes up there and pull them down into my local computer. Okay. So that's kind of like the overall structure of that. And I know the curriculum, I will say the curriculum goes into more detail. I don't expect you all to now know once you read the curriculum, like, oh, now I understand everything I get. It definitely takes some time to practice and see it through and hear it talked about a few times. Okay, cool. All right, I just want to see what we have left. I think we're going to stop here. So we'll stop our study group here. But what I'll probably do is continue on with office hours just to kind of show you all. But I'm going to actually continue recording these office hours. But since we are, past that hour-and-a-half time, which would be our normal study group time, if you do have to head out, feel free to head out and stuff like this. But before I hop into that, if you guys have any questions at all, and I think I saw someone unmute themselves. If they have a question.
Yeah, I said the one-on-ones. Where do we schedule this from?
Yes. Oh, good question. So one-on-ones. I used to use a link, and over time, that link just ended up being more frustration. Okay. Message me. So I'll they're not necessary to do. In the future, right? In the future, it's like, okay.
Discuss GitHub stuff.
Yeah, I would say in the future, most of that time will be with office hours. That's why I kind of give you guys quite a bit of extra office hours. But okay. For the first time, I would like to have a one-on-one setup. I haven't said this explicitly, which I'm glad you brought this up, Clark. is the first like week, 2 weeks, I like to meet at least a little bit with each one and kind of see how everyone's doing. So just message me and say what your times are available, and I will try to fit things in. It's just easier that way than me trying to like say these are the times available. Wait,
Right.
but we have the first week and stuff like that. So this week, especially because we don't have anything on Thursday, I would suggest, you know, try to find a time on Thursday that would work well for you and just message me, and then we'll try to work things out.
Okay.
Cool.
Perfect.
Thank you for bringing that up.
Sure.
All right. Cool. Any other questions before I'll move on to just showing you a little bit of what I talked about in GitHub, and then we'll kind of go into office hours in general. Pretty good. Cool. All right. I realized I didn't give you guys a break. I'm just gonna keep going and everything like that. Tell you what, I will give you guys a break, a little quick 5-minute break. Stretch your legs a little bit. I will also record the second half of this, like me going through stuff, so that way you guys can review it. I would suggest you guys coming back in 5 minutes, but if you don't, I'm totally cool with that too. All right. So I'm gonna pause the recording. All right. For people who are watching the recording, someone just asked, Myrna just asked if how would we see the solutions to like labs and projects and stuff like that we have. So if you're on a project, let's say like the mini project for analyzing Macbeth, you could open up what's it called? You can open up a LuminaDesk here and load it in. I will frequently refer back to the GitHub repo, which if you haven't seen this already, there's actually a little icon right here, and that's like the little icon for GitHub. If you click on this, this will actually open up the repo associated with that lab. It's literally the same thing. And if you open up a LuminaDesk, it actually loads up all these files in there, ready for you to start working on like the notebook. But you'll see here is like, here's the project, and it talks about like what you need to do and what your task is. If you click on this branch right here on GitHub, you'll see this as master. It might say main sometimes, but I think most of them say master. You'll see this as curriculum solution. I actually don't know if you actually will see curriculum, but you'll see solution for sure. If you click on this, I will tell you, it is a solution. It does not mean it is the solution. It is the only solution. I almost imagine this as like, this solution is like an example work through. So it's not going to be perfect necessarily, and sometimes it does things in the solution notebook. It might do things differently than I personally would have done. So just kind of know that. But from there, you'll actually see the code actually written out and like what someone's done. In this case, I think this mini Macbeth project, I think the curriculum team worked really hard to make sure that you understand, like it's coded, not coded, commented and everything to show you what's going on. But not all solutions will have all of this extensive comments and stuff too. So just kind of know that. But this is where people say like, oh, should I look at the solution, stuff like that? Yeah, feel free to look at the solution. There's no problem with that. But I would say be honest with yourself too, is that one way I would suggest doing this is that, especially for like a lab where you have multiple steps, try doing, the lab, going through it and try to, actually write out the code and stuff like that, see what works. And then if you get stuck, think about it a little bit, maybe search for it. But if you're stuck more than like 15 minutes, like I would say one thing is just go to solution and see what is the next step they did, and then see if that unsticks, like basically you figure it out. It's like, oh, that's what makes sense, and then continue on back to your original code. I think that's a good strategy overall. One thing I would say, don't try not to do is try not to go to the solution and just like literally like copy parts, even if it's the parts that like you're really stuck on. Like one thing I would suggest is actually try to type it out. And part of that's just muscle memory and just kind of gets you the feel for what should go there, where it's so easy just to copy and paste it into another place. And trust me, I copy and paste code, as I need to, because, it's like, oh, I just need a certain segment and I copy and paste that code. But when you're learning, especially, it's so easy just to like not realize what you're doing and convince yourself that it's like, oh no, I really understand this, and you copy and paste it and you don't really understand it. Kind of in the same sense of like watching a video. It's like you can watch a video and understand it and do a good job in there, but it's really easy and fall into the trap of thinking that you understand, what's being said. And it turns out you're just kind of like tricking yourself into thinking that you know what's going on. So yeah, anyway, that's how you find the solution. Cool. All right, cool. I think that answered her question. Awesome. All right, so like I mentioned before we went on a little break, so I have a little there we go. I turn off my notifications real quick just so I don't need this right now. Sorry, everyone. Okay. At least turn off some of them. Okay. I was gonna go show you a little bit of how to use Git, right? And like what this process looks like. So I showed a little bit of this in office hours earlier today, but it's worth kind of repeating it through. So I'm gonna show the Macbeth project again. So we're gonna open up the Macbeth project. And this is how I would suggest you work on the Macbeth project. You could open up a Lumindesk and work on it. There's a few reasons why I suggested this method, and it comes down to how you do, how GitHub works and what's the point of GitHub. So this is my profile right here, and you can see a few things like some descriptions. You can see my name here. You can see a few projects I've done, and you can also see something called the contribution graph. This contribution graph really is kind of like saying, essentially it's supposed to represent how active have you been on GitHub. You can see, for example, during parental leave, I was a little like not too active over here, and same thing over here. But like this kind of gives a first impression to anyone seeing your GitHub, and you can think of GitHub being as kind of like your professional profile. You're like, hey, like check out what I've done, you know. And so my thing is that, so I'll say it's no one's going to hire you or not hire you based on what they see like purely on your GitHub contribution or even your GitHub page. Does it help though? Yes, I would say is that this does give a first impression of like what kind of person you are like in applying. Like, you know, if you said you've been doing a bootcamp for 5 months, and I see that for the past 5 months you've been doing a lot of contributions on GitHub, it like means like, oh, like they've been really active, you know, during this 5 months. Where you can say you've been on a bootcamp for 5 months, and you know, the person might say, well, what have you done? And you have nothing to show for it. Like, it's kind of like, well, they probably did a lot of stuff, but I mean, how do I know? Where's the evidence? And this is kind of like their first sign of evidence. So the issue with this is that I talked about this office hours earlier. So those people over there, you can hear me repeat some of the stuff, but it's worth repeating, is that some contributions aren't shown on here. And what is a contribution? Things like making a new repository, forking a repository, doing a pull request, which we'll talk about in the future, and then also making commits. So when you make a commit, you can see this shows up as contributions, a little square on your day. And that's going to be the main source of all these contributions for us at this level. So the thing is, though, not all commits are counted towards, what's it called? Count towards your contribution graph. You might actually have contribution, like commits that are not counted as contributions. And usually those are from forks, or basically repos that are not like an individual repo. So if I don't know exactly where this is stated in the curriculum, but I know it's stated at least some point. They talk about forking a repo. Has anyone come across that? Who's here? Okay, I see a little nod, I see a hand. Okay, so it does mention about forking a repo. This is where I'm going to diverge strongly against the curriculum. I don't think you should fork a repo, unless the reason why you fork a repo is really to contribute to the original repo. So for example, if I click fork here, I'll show you what this looks like. If I fork this data science curriculum, I have multiple profiles here, so I have to click on my actual profile. You'll see that my fork is doing some stuff right now, is that it has a link to the original repo, which was the Macbeth project, and it makes a new repo that is my repo right here. And you can see though, it says fork from here, and there's not an issue with it being forked. But the main reason why you fork is so you have this reference to the original repo. And I'm not going to go into full details just because we could, like people have seen this morning who've been in office hours, I could go on for like an hour about this, exactly what's going on. But the main reason why you fork something is that you plan to incorporate your changes in your forked repo back into the original repo. But in the case for the bootcamp stuff, like if we're doing like this mini project or the labs, you're not planning to merge your code into the curriculum, you know, original repo, right? That's not really what the purpose. Really what we're doing is when we say we're making this project a clone of this or forking this repo, what we really want to do is make this our own project. And I think this is actually not the best solution, because now if you make commits to this repo, what's going to happen is that it's just not going to show up on your contribution graph. People can see it in your GitHub profile as long as you keep things public, but it won't show up immediately on here, which isn't like the worst thing. But again, this is kind of like your first impression where like, if you can show that you've been doing work, it's kind of a nice thing to be able to show off, right? So I'm going to show you a little step by step that it's going to be a little bit more of a process, but I think overall it's going to be beneficial for the next 5 months, where you can show a little bit of your work. Okay, does that make sense to people? A little quick of like why I say don't do forking, like, you know, at least for these projects and stuff like this. There is a time and place, but I think for most of the projects you won't need a fork.
Victor, so if
Mhm.
I've forked pretty much all of topic 1 thus far,
Mhm.
for all the assignments, uh, just to keep it in my own, and then I cloned it, just like
Mhm.
how they showed it in the thing. Should I like undo that? Is that something I should undo, or?
Yeah, good
'Cause I,
question. I would say at this level, since we just started, don't worry about it. For the future stuff, I would say that's when you can start doing this stuff. It's mostly because like I'll usually have like students who graduate after 5 months, or the part-time 10 months. And what happens is that because they forked everything, it looks like they have not been doing nothing for the past, 5+ months. But in reality, they have been doing stuff, and they're like, oh, like it doesn't show up on here. And it's like, well, like if you wanted to show up, what we should have done is this instead, and that's what I'm about to show you. But if you've done like a few projects already like this, it's not a big deal.
Okay.
Okay, cool. All right, good question, by the way. And then for the record, I might show you guys maybe next week, even like during an office hours, say how to organize your repos, because otherwise you might have literally hundreds of repos just from this boot camp, which it's not a bad thing, but it does kind of clutter up like your GitHub sometimes, versus like trying to show people like, hey, these are the things I actually care for you to look at. Okay, so we're going to ignore this fork right here, and we're going to go back to the original repo, and I'm going to show you how to actually clone this in the preferred, at least my preferred way. I think it would be useful. All right, so you can see all my terminal right here on the left. Yes, okay, good. I just want to make sure I'm still sharing my full screen. So I'm going to pretend I'm you all, right? Like I'm like in your situation. I'm like, okay, I'm going to do the Macbeth project, crack my knuckles, and moving forward. So first of all, open up my terminal, make sure the learn environment has been activated, right? So that I have all that stuff that's going through here. In this case, I actually am in a new temp directory. So I'll do a pwd. You can see here is that I just am in this temp directory. I do have a file in here, but that's not important. I'm going to show this a little bit later, but normally this would be empty, right? Okay. And now what I'm going to do, I'm going to clone the repo into here. So instead of clicking the fork like I just showed you, I'm actually going to click on this code right here, and you can see this guy, right? This is the URL that basically represents this repo. And so I'm going to clone with this. So the first step is I copy this. I do go git clone. Okay, and this assumes Git's already set up with my config and everything like that we did in topic 1. And I'm going to paste that URL. Okay, note that Git's pretty smart. If you did this, it probably would work as well. But in reality, you really should be copying this URL. Okay, so you should notice is it got a .git at the end. All right, so I go ahead and click enter. And what this does, basically, it downloads all of these files and calls it, in this case, DSC-analyzing Macbeth project, whatever. You can actually, once it's cloned, you can rename that folder if it's a little bit easier for you to like you don't have to type that whole thing in, but it doesn't really matter. So now if you see, if I go in my terminal and do ls, you can see there's my Macbeth project, right? Cool. So I'm going to go ahead and cd into that Macbeth project. And if I do ls, you can see here, there's all the files. And just to make it a little bit easier, you can see contributing, MD, license, MD, readme, and then index, IPNB, index files, all that good stuff. You also notice there's a .getting or .learn. Don't worry about that for right now, but just know that it's also in there, it's just a hidden file. Okay, so cool. Everyone follow me so far? So all I've done is just copy. I copied this repo down to my computer. Now, before I actually get into like making changes and stuff like that, I want to show you a little bit like why you would clone. So if I do Git Log, remember I mentioned this during study group, I can actually see the full history of what people have done. And you'll see here, this is Matt, Laura, right, up from our curriculum team. You can see there's some changes on here. And each of these guys right here is a reference to a commit. The reason why this long string of characters, basically something called a hash, it basically is a representation of like kind of like an address to saying, oh, this is the point in time of what's happening and changing. So you'll notice if I actually click on this repo here, remember I'm still on Macbeth on GitHub here, click commits, you'll actually see it's the same exact commit history, fix typos, update learning objectives. And you can see it's actually, in this case, it's Matt, and this one is Laura. You can see it's the same thing. So that means I can see I have the shared history. Note if you're on this now, you can go up and down with the arrow keys, and I can click Q to actually exit out of that history. So cool. That means we have all that history in there. And what's nice about that is like now we also inherit basically all of that past history when we make our new project now. Okay. However, there is a slight issue. And if anyone's already started on this and did like Git Add, Git Commit, you know, and trying to do all that stuff, and then they get to Git Push, you'll notice if you do Git Push, this will work for me because I have permission to write to this repository just because I'm a staff member here. But if you didn't have permission to actually write to that repository, if you do a Git Push, you'll get an error that says like you permission denied. And we're like, what do you mean permission denied? Like what's going on? And it's because you're trying to push your code from your local repository right here on your computer onto GitHub, which is this guy over here. And you don't have permission to write to this repository. It's not yours. Okay. So what we need to do is we say, hey, when I push this, I don't want to push it to the Learn Code curriculums repository. I want to push it to my own personal repository, right? So what I have to do is I have to make a new repo that will host basically all the stuff I made changes over here. Okay, does that follow for everyone? Okay, cool. All right, and again, interrupt me if I'm going too fast, or if you want me to repeat anything or clarification. So what I first need to do is make a new repository. So I'm actually going to click a new repository here. I'm making a new tab so you can reference back to the original Macbeth. I click new repository. So you saw that. Click up here, new repository. There's a few ways to do it, but that's the most straightforward. And you'll see my profile right here, and I'll give it a repository name. In this case, I'll call it like my Macbeth. Okay, so you can name it whatever project you want in this case, and this is going to host the stuff that we have over on our local repo. So I'll put my Macbeth. We can put description. I'm not going to put that in right now. You can keep it public. You don't really have to worry about making things private unless you are really concerned about showing things that like for this project, you should just make it public. There's no reason to keep it private. For the record though, if you do make it private and you make commits to it, that still shows up on your contribution graph. Just people don't see what you did a contribution to. It's just that it's private. Okay. So I'll keep it public. I won't click any of these things because if I click on this, this will actually add a new history to something, but I already have some history that I want to keep on here. So I'm actually going to skip all of these check marks and just click create repository. Everyone follow me so far? Cool. So I'm making a new repository on GitHub. I click create repository and you'll see this kind of load up. And then here's my repository here. And you'll see it says a few things. It says, hey, you can create a new repository in the command line, or push an existing repository, or import code from another repository. So I'm actually not going to do this guy right here. If I was making a completely new, fresh repository, like no history, starting from scratch, I would probably follow these directions. In this case, this is very specific, so I wouldn't be doing this either. So you notice I talked about like Subversion Mercurial earlier. This is if you had something from something else, so we're not going to worry about that. We're actually going to follow something close to this. And so the issue is that this repo on my local computer is still tied to the Macbeth repo from Learn Curriculum, but I want this repo, this local repo, to connect to my guy over here. You understand what I want? So I can actually look at this, and it's called the remote. So if I do git remote -v, -v, you'll see that it actually lists out, and let me see if I can kind of make this a little bigger. There we go. So let me just do that again, git remote -v. This lists out my connections when I do a git push, where that will be pushed up to. So in this case, it's called origin, and it's going to be connecting to this repo. But note that's the Learn Code curriculum. And that's not what I want. I want it to connect to my guy, right? So the first step I got to do is actually remove this reference to that remote, because I don't want to push up to that repo. Everyone follow me? Cool. So I'm going to do git remote, and it turns out it's rm. And then I'm going to name the name of that connection, which is origin. So git remote rm remove origin. And if you didn't remember how to do this, you could just Google, remove remote on Git, and you would probably find this exact thing, okay? Or reach out, right? So I do that, and now it removes that remote. And now you'll see if I do git remote -v, I don't have that reference anymore. Okay, makes sense? Cool. And note that my files are still here. So like I didn't do anything. All I did was just remove this connection that's going to push, that would have pushed my code up to the Learn Code Curriculum's repo, which is not what I want. So now they have that. I want to add this repo, my own repo, to this connection right here. So I'm going to push from here to this repo. And you can see here, it actually has in the second line, git remote add origin, and then the long URL that is this repo. So I'm actually going to copy this guy. And what this is going to do is that this is going to make my remote, it's going to add the thing called origin. Okay, that's the name of this like connection. And it's going to point to that specific repo here on GitHub. And so if I do this, this will actually add that connection. I can then do a git push. Okay, Aaron, follow me on that? Okay, cool. So I do that. And now if I do git remote -v, you should see that I have that origin, but now it's actually pointing to my specific repo. Okay, so now note that nothing's changed up here. If I refresh this page, nothing's changed, right? Because I haven't pushed anything up. But now when I say, okay, cool, like I actually want to push this up. If you notice right here, like you can do this stage right here. Note this is git branch -m main. That actually renamed your current branch to the name main. The reason why this happens, I think I mentioned this in office hours, is that master, it used to, all default branches used to be called master. There is a little bit of a movement of saying like, like a master has some different connotations that don't really make sense in this scenario, and that main actually is probably a better way to call this. So just know that you might see master or main. But if you want to be hip with the times, or just show like, oh, you kind of are aware of this, it's not a bad thing to rename it. So I'm actually going to name this branch. So note that you won't see this in your prompt, but if I do git branch, you'll see that it will say master. If I do git branch -m, which is basically just saying rename this branch to main, you'll see now if I do git branch, it's now main, or there, main. Okay, so this step is optional, but it's not bad. But if you do this step, then you would copy this guy here, and you would do git push -u origin main. So I mentioned earlier in study group, I said, hey, you can do, you can now set this up. This is the very first time you push, so you do -u to set up that upstream. So I'm going to do git push, basically push my code that's on my computer right now onto this repo right here from the origin connection, which we defined up here, into push the main branch. So that's the main branch here. Okay, so in this case, I only have one branch, so it doesn't really matter, but it's asking you to be specific. Okay, so if I run this, it'll push all my code, upload it onto GitHub. All right, sound good so far? Cool. All right, so I'm going to run this guy. And oh, I forgot I had to do this. I have to put in my password, and I told people already I have a password in other places, which I don't show online, which I know I'm going to put this video on, so that's why it's nice to make sure I don't access token. Sorry, I'm doing stuff off screen. Hopefully that was off screen. All right, and then I'm going to paste my password, and there we go. And now it's pushing it up, and now you see it's like, hey, okay, it's doing all this stuff, it's compressing, blah, 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 resolving, and then it says, all right, it says branches main set up to track remote branch main from origin. Basically, that's saying, hey, your branch main on here is now set up on the remote branch main from the origin connection. So now if I refresh this page, I should see my full history that would have been on this computer. And there you go. You can see I get the full history, that 14 commits. Note that it's going to be other people's names because they're the people who actually made those changes already. And that's actually good. It's like, okay, that's referring back to saying who made these changes. It wasn't me. Okay, it was someone else who did this. All right. So now I can actually start working on this. All right. How does that all sound? Thumbs up? Thumbs up, that sound good? Sideways, you're like, I'm just going to practice. Thumbs up, you completely lost me. Okay, I think I see mostly like this, yeah. All right, so the main thing is the stuff you have to know. Like, this is what I did, is step one, and I did this in office hours, so I'm going to repeat it again, is step one is I went ahead and cloned the repo. Oops, the repo. Okay, so that's the repo from the project, right? So I clone the repo. Okay, I'll say onto local. And the way I did that, how did I do that? I did git clone. Git clone and then the URL that I needed to do, right? Okay, so I cloned the repo. Okay, what was step 2? Do you remember?
Create the repository.
Yeah, so create a new repository, right? So create new repository. Say on GitHub. So there's no command there. I just said create new repository, right? Okay, what was my next step?
Change the branch name.
Change the branch name. Good. So that was something I did do. So I think actually, yeah, I'll put this here. So I could have done it at this point as an optional step, but I'll say change branch name. Change branch name to main. This could have done at any point, but I did it a little bit later, but it kind of makes sense here. And that's git
Branch.
git branch -m. Yeah, thank you. Cool.
We
right.
removed our old connection from
That's
which we
it.
were fetching.
Removed old remote connection was called origin. So I did that. So what I did there, it's a few things, right? I did git remote, git remote -v, and that what that does, that lists the remote connections, right? And then what I did git, oops, I hate that it does that automatically. Coding on Google Docs is not fun. Git remote rm, and then I'm removing that connection, which was called origin. Okay, and I say that removes the remote connection. I'll say from original repo. Okay, everyone follow me so far? Okay, so hopefully you can kind of think like mentally what we did, right? And then step 4, so okay, I cloned the repo, I did the git clone, I technically did the change the branch name, like Bula said it, but I did that later on, but you could technically do that right here. I created a new repo on GitHub, I removed the old remote connection from on my local computer, right, with git remote dv or -v to see what the remote was, doing the git remote rm origin, and then what do I do next?
Push.
Close. I guess I did do push. I'll say, push code to repo. That's what's kind of like step 4/5. I'm going to kind of say that's step 5. There's something a little bit right before that, right? And that's adding the remote before I push, right? So I add a new remote. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, cool. And technically, you could just combine that as 2 different steps. I'm just going to say it's 2 different steps here. Or sorry, combine into 1 step instead of 2 different steps. So I add a new remote by doing git, oh my goodness, git remote add origin, and then URL new. Okay, so adds the remote to my new repo. Okay, makes sense. Cool. All right, and then like was said, I pushed the code, right? I pushed my code to the new repo. So push code to new repo, and that was just done by git push -u origin, and then it's not remote. It's trying to be too smart. It's in this case main, and note that main, don't capitalize things for me, is the name of the branch I'm pushing. Okay, and that's it. Okay. Did I miss anything here? I think that's what's going on here. Note that the Git branch, I forgot we actually renamed things, but you could rename it at any point during this point because until right here. But you could have done it here too. Okay.
So when we press save on like the Jupyter notebook, it would save it to our local computer. But if you wanted to add it or add the changes to the repository, you would still have to go through the Git Add and then Git State, or sorry, Git Add and then Git Commit in order, I guess, with message, I guess, in order to add it to our actual repository.
Yep, that's absolutely right. So would you all like me to show you a little bit what that might look like? Would that be helpful? I know we're a little bit technically. I said like, oh, we'll stop at like 20 more minutes, but I think it might be useful. Would you guys like me to show you really quickly what that might look like?
Yes, please.
All right,
Yep.
see thumbs up. Cool, awesome. So let me close this guy because I don't need. Oh no, I need. There we go. So I'm just kind of reorganizing. So we're back on here. Here is my repo that we just made, right? So I'm going to clear this out. And right now, if I do git status, there should be no changes, right? Because nothing's changed, right? Like, I don't know anything. So I'm actually going to open up a new terminal just so I don't have it all cluttered. But I'm just going to open up Jupyter Notebook right here. I'll tell you what. I'm just going to do conda activate. There we go. And now I'm going to start Jupyter Notebook. Okay, so now I have Jupyter running here. I have this stuff right here, index, and that should be the repo. And you'll see here, I have some stuff. And let's just say I'm going to do a really simple change. I'm just going to call this project, analyzing there. I'll just put my project. Look at that. Super big change, right? Making this my own. So you would honestly do a bunch of different code and stuff like this. You might rerun this. For example, if I run this guy again, you can see that goes through here. But now if I have, let's say, save, right? Or if you did file save and whatnot, if I do git status here, you see that there's some changes. And what was modified? The index.inp, right? So I changed this guy. So what I'm going to do here, and even tells, hey, you made a change. Do you want to use Git Add? So it's trying to tell me, hey, do Git change. Just to show you an example. All right, okay, I'm going to do one thing at a time. So I'll do Git Add. And then what did I change? Index.ipnb. Oops. And so I'm actually going to specify the file name. You could do git add dot, but I always say be more specific. That way you don't come into weird trouble. And I do git add inbxb. And I do git status now. You'll see now, hey, changes to be committed. So I did that git add. I moved that change to the staging area. Oh, excuse me. So I moved it to the staging area, but it hasn't been committed yet. Okay. So note that if I did this, I could do git commit right now and go forward. But let's just pretend I also like made some other change. Let's say I did something like I got rid of this pseudocode stuff and I saved this. All right. So I did save right here. If I do git status now, there'll be still stuff in my staging area, but also there'll be things ready to be not staged for commit. That's in my working area. So note that just I delete this stuff right here. When I do a git commit, it will only include the changes up to that git add state part. Does that make sense? So this is an important aspect to do because sometimes people like do git add and then they didn't commit it yet, and then they'll make changes and they'll save it and then they'll commit. It won't include those new changes because I haven't done git add. Does that make sense?
So if you did git add dot, would it do everything that is ready?
Yeah, so if I do git add dot, or in this case, only one file is changed, it'd be the same thing as doing index.ipnb. If I did git add dot or index.ipnb, I'm not going to be specific because I'm going to hammer in for you guys to like be specific. If I did this now, it'll actually make this now say, hey, you made some changes. It'll add this to the staging area, which will actually overwrite, my staging area. So you'll see if I do this now and do git status, you will see that only this has changed now. And that will actually include my change I saved.
So the dot is just for separate files.
Yeah, you can say the dot really represents saying this current working directory is really what that git dot is. Yeah. So just like if I do cd dot, that doesn't do anything. It's just because it's changing directory to the current directory.
Gotcha.
Okay. Cool. All right. So I got stuff in my, I got my changes in my staging area. What's my next step?
Commit.
Commit. Good. So I do git commit. And then in this case, I'm going to do -m, right? So I don't have to write a message. If you don't do -m and you do just git commit, that's fine, but it'll open up whatever your default editor is in your configuration, which can be useful sometimes. But in this case, since it's a really short commit, I'm just going to do -m and then write out my commit. This first line, convention says it should be about less than 50 characters. If you have more than 50 characters, it's considered that's extra details, and you can have that in commit, but you should technically make it a second line. Did someone raise their hand? No? Okay, so cool. I'll go ahead and make this commit message, and I'll say made this project my own. Okay, just saying like.
Oh, sorry. On
Okay.
like the quiz on Git, they mentioned like to commit and add, like you do like m dash or dash ma or something. When's that used, I guess?
That's kind of a quick commit. So I think Becky mentioned this during the study group where he said, do we have to go to the staging area? You could just add and commit at the same time.
Okay.
And you could technically do it, but I would say, especially starting off, I would probably do add and then commit. And personally, I never use that strategy because like I'm always too careful of myself. I know I mess up all the time. So like I know like, hey, let me take my time and do that. So that'd be my suggestion too. But you could do it that way. Yeah. So okay, I'll go ahead and git commit here. My message made this project my own. Enter. Boom. I made my first commit. So note that when I made that commit, that does not change the, there's my repo. It does not change my repo. So if I go ahead and refresh this page, you'll still see 14 commits. Nothing's changed. Okay. So I have to now, this did make a change. I'm going to do Git Log. And you can see here, this was the last commit that was on there. And note that this is origin main, because it's origin saying, oh, that's what's on the remote right now. But this guy right here, this is not origin main. This is a commit I just made, right? And you can see the author is my name right here, right? So you can see here is that I need to make this commit, this history, sync up with what's on GitHub, okay? And that's what we do with our Git push with. Does that make sense to people? Okay. I will show you a little short that I have, is that this is kind of a little bit abbreviated, and you can see a little bit better, I think, is that you can see this is my actual message right here. This is the new commit that is not on here right now. Note that if you see the last commit that was on here was CCCF, and you can see that's where this comes from, CCCF. It's an abbreviated title. Okay, so now I got to do a Git push. So I got to do Git push, and I could do origin main. Like I could put that out verbosely because that's what I'm pushing using the origin, pushing my main branch. But if you already have it set up, you can just do Git push and they'll push your current branch up there by default. If you don't have it set up, it'll yell at you. It'll say, hey, you can't do that. So you have to be specific. So if I do this now, when I load, it's uploading. There it goes. And it looks all done. So now if I refresh this page, you'll see 15 commits, and you should see .ipnb. You'll see that happened like a few minutes ago, and then it'll have a new commit message. Let's go ahead and refresh the page. And boom, there we go. You can see 2 minutes, 15 commits, and you can see this guy right here. And you can see the most latest commit, which is 918, like that, 918, 918. And so I made my commit onto my thing. And note that I can also check my contribution graph, as I was kind of mentioning about. You're going to see a few extra ones just because I made some earlier today. You can see I have 5 contributions, and one of those contributions, there's Macbeth. You say 1 commit. Okay, cool. Any questions on that?
Checking my profile, I did. My contributions show the forks I did as well. So I know we did this for the sake of making sure it shows. In maybe mine is like set to default. That's why the forks also show. But
yeah, it should show. Look carefully. It'll show when you create a fork, but it won't show contributions for every commit you made on that fork.
Okay.
So it'll still count as a contribution for making a fork, which is basically equivalent to making a repo, which counts as a contribution. But it doesn't. If you do like 5 commits right now on a fork, you should see that nothing changes.
You're right. It only showed my initial fork creation.
Yeah, and that's the subtlety of. So what people will have are little islands of like a bunch of like forks, but then like nothing because they've been working on those forks, and then a bunch of icons right there. So it just makes it a little more obvious to someone who's looking at your GitHub profile that like you've been making contributions or you've been making commits and stuff. Okay, cool. Cool. So that's kind of like I kind of walked through. It was a little extra time, and I know I recorded it and stuff like this. But hopefully that helps you all out. Are there any questions about anything I've done showing you all today? Cool. Are there any questions or follow-up, clarification that maybe, I may not have talked about or anything like that?
Oh, could you post that little Google Sheets that you just
This guy right
or
here?
that random Google document? I think it'll just be a good reminder if you can just post it on Slack or something. That'd be great.
Yes. Oh, and while you're saying that too, I will post this on here from project. So I'll make sure to post that today. And then I also wanted to point out, I think I showed people this from office hours. So I would recommend trying to get through this flow of like trying to like understand like what's going on here and do this manually. I did create a little tool that can help you a little bit more. So let me go to that. Would you guys like to see that real quick? I know I showed some people from office hours, but okay, see a thumbs up. So let me go ahead and pull this up. So it's actually under Git, and under Git is tools. I'm going to send you guys the link to this right now on Slack, or not on Slack, on Zoom. Okay, so note that there's this little script called gitclone.sh. Okay, so if you can download this specific file. And do you guys know how to? I don't know if anyone knows how to actually download files from GitHub. So if you actually click on this guy specifically, you can see all of this guy here. You could copy and paste this, but an easier way is just click raw. And then you just, Command S or Control S, whatever your control is, and you can save this file directly. I already saved this file down here, but you can click save and it'll download this file. Okay, so that's how you would do that. Otherwise, you can like clone it or whatever, but whatever this file is right here, this is basically does the same steps as what I showed you in this Google Doc right here, except for renaming. I think the only thing it doesn't do is rename the branch. That would be up to you. But if you do that, then this Git clone should technically work. So I'll show you what that looks like. So let me go up one file, and you can see here that's where my Git clone is. And I'm actually going to just go ahead and remove. Remember, don't do this, but I'm doing it because I don't do it. I'm just removing that stuff that we just made on the repo. Okay, so let's say I have git clone.sh, and note that I also have a little video. I'll just send this to you guys too. Is I have a YouTube video that shows me doing this exact things, like me 10, 15 minutes me going this exact stuff. But basically what happens, you have this git clone.sh. If you get a permission, this is, oh, you're not allowed to like you can't run this for some reason, let me know, and I can kind of show you what that does. But to run this, you can do .git clone sh, or I guess technically the better way is sh, oops, sh git clone. And this is, oh, okay, execute this, script. And so what this script does is basically doing the same things, but it's going to walk you through it. So it's going to say, okay, enter original Git repository URL. So from GitHub, it looks like ht_git. So what that's saying is like, hey, what's the original repo that you're going to use? In that case, it is this guy. So I'm actually going to copy Macbeth. So I'm going to paste this into here. Okay, you guys see what I'm talking about, right? I'm thinking the original repo. Cool. So I'm going to make this in here. And there it goes. And you'll notice that it says it's just going to clone it onto my computer. And then it says, all right, now for your repository URL from GitHub. If you haven't done so already, go to github.com and make a new empty repo. Okay, there's a little typo, but that's okay. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pretend I didn't make a new repo yet. So I'm going to make a new repo. I'm going to call it like Macbeth again, because then it's like 4 times now today. So Macbeth again, create repository. And remember, it's an empty repo. Don't click on these extra check marks. There we go. So I'm going to copy this guy. And I'm going to paste into here. Okay. And then press enter. And then it says, there it goes. Oh, continue to push your, oops, I think I pressed enter twice. My bad. It stops right here and says, hey, like continue to push your GitHub repo, press enter, and then you press enter and it'll go through. So it looks like that should have worked. Let's see if it messed up. There it goes. Okay, so I must have pressed enter twice or something, but it will ask you, say, are you sure you want to do this? And say yes by pressing enter, and then it'll push it up here. And then then you have to do this whole steps. It's there might, for the record, there might be some bugs in this little clone sh, especially since I don't have it renamed. For example, you can see it has master instead of main. So if I wanted to rename the branch, I would have to make sure I specify that. The script won't do that. But if you absolutely wanted to, you could use that little clone, this little script right here. And you can see a little bit, like you guys might not know what shell scripting looks like. But, I'm sorry, someone had a question or? No? Okay. Just know that it basically is doing the same thing. It's just giving you some extra directions so you can do it too. Okay. Cool. And again, this makes it your own repo. All right. Cool. So that's kind of all I really wanted to show you all. I'm going to stop recording here unless people have any other questions on this specifically. Cool. And then we'll go into office hours in case anyone wanted to talk about anything else, which